Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next webinar, Climate Change Through the Eyes of Children in Their Youngest Years, a Youth Perspective. Before we begin, we invite you to type your name and the location in the chat so that we know where everyone is joining in from. Now, climate change is not only an environmental issue, it is a child development issue. And young children are the most vulnerable to climate shocks and uncertainties. Yet, they are missing and absent from climate policies and discussions. So, today, in an attempt to bring children to the center of climate discussions, we have organized this webinar with our youth advocates and youth champions. Next slide, please. So the objectives are to understand this intersection of early childhood development and climate change and bring children at the center of the discussions of climate action and climate policies. We would also hear from youth advocates regarding their experiences of using photo voice and intergenerational ethnographic methods, and also understand how, as youth, as ECD practitioners, as people working with early childhood development, we can engage with various policy discussions at different platforms. We're also showcasing the lived experiences of children through videos and pictures that are captured as a coffee table book, and we'll launch that. So, without further ado, I'm inviting Evelyn for her opening remarks. Evelyn, over to you.
Thank you, Nilima. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on which part of the world you're in as you join today's webinar. I am very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar that highlights meaningful engagement of the youth champions who have been working with us, on addressing the impacts of climate change on young children. And so this webinar, as Nilima said, will showcase an inspiring youth-led research and advocacy initiative that elevates the voices and lived experiences of young children and their caregivers on the impact of climate change across the Asia-Pacific region. Next slide, please. ARNEC, as you know, we have been strongly advocating for the need to put young children at the center of climate actions. We are all affected by climate change, each one of us, but it disproportionately affects the young children as they are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Climate change poses significant risk to young children, affecting their health and overall well-being. In fact, the UNICEF Children's Climate Risk Index report reveals that about a billion children, or nearly half of the world's children, live in extremely high-risk countries and suffer from the impacts of climate change, such as, but not limited to, typhoons, food shortages, massive flooding, droughts, and rising sea levels. The Children's Climate Risk Index ranks countries based on children's exposure to climate and environmental shocks. And unfortunately, most of the countries in our region fall under the high risk category. We all know the importance of holistic and integrated approach to early childhood development, as articulated in the Nurturing Care Framework developed by WHO and UNICEF. The framework highlights the need to address the indivisible domains of nutrition, good health, opportunities for early learning, responsive caregiving, and safety and security. But climate-related shocks, undermine these nurturing care domains. And despite their high vulnerability, young children remain largely overlooked in climate policies, financing, and adaptation plans. And this essentially is the reason why ARNEC is at the forefront of the ECD and climate change advocacy. Next slide, please. Most of you know that as early as 2019, ARNEC, together with our partners such as UNICEF and Save the Children, have already been working on the intersection of ECD, climate change, and sustainable development. Through our conferences, webinars, publications, call to actions, and other learning platforms, we have consistently articulated that ECD is an effective pathway to climate resilience and sustainable development. We have been working with our partners in countries such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Indonesia, Nepal, Pakistan, and the Philippines in raising awareness, generating evidence, and mobilizing actions on ECD and climate change. Next, please. Our approach, as you can see in this slide, in integrating ECD into climate action focuses on 4 action pillars: advocacy and awareness raising on how different climate risks are affecting young children's health and development, conducting research and generating evidence, especially at the local level, at the country level, collaboration and partnerships with different stakeholders, and building capacity of stakeholders, again, especially at the country level. Key resources, we have produced a lot of them, but notable would be the ECD and Climate Toolkit and the creation of a knowledge hub that stores different resources on ECD and climate change. And all of this you can find in our website. Next, please. Part of our approach in pushing for a climate responsive and resilient ECD system is the engagement of youth representatives as ECD champions in the context of climate change. ARNEC has been very intentional in engaging youth in the ECD and climate agenda, as we recognize and value their voice and contributions. We consider them as strategic partners and recognize their leadership in the climate movement, demanding accountability and actions. We believe that engaging the youth makes the ECD and climate movement more inclusive and transformative. Next, please. And so we have been supporting our youth champions in deepening their understanding of how young children are affected by climate change. And as part of their ECD journey, they co-created with us a meaningful advocacy resource, a coffee table book which we are launching today. The coffee table book is called Resilient Futures, Protecting Young Lives in a Changing Climate. It showcases our advocacy and commitment to placing young children at the center of climate actions. We thank our youth champions, and some of them are here today. You will hear from them. But personally, I really thank our youth champions, Voch, Katyani, Nika, Sagar, Mehedi, Namgay, and Erwin for capturing compelling images, sharing their reflections, and emerging as critical voices. This coffee table book is truly a testament to what our young people can do, unleashing their creativity and innovation in support of their advocacy. We also acknowledge our partners, especially the Bainum Foundation, the Early Childhood Regional Networks Fund, and the Oxford University, whose contributions made this coffee table book possible. This book is meant to travel, to be read, and shared widely. We created this book to strengthen the call for climate resilient ECD systems and ensure that youngest voices are heard and not forgotten in climate action. We hope that these images, photographs, and stories inspire you to support our advocacy for a clean, safe, nurturing, and sustainable environment for young children. Together, let us prioritize climate action for young children, and let's continue to push the ECD and climate agenda. Thank you, and let's now look at the coffee table book. Niha, if you can just show it.
You can download this coffee table book. We are going to show a digital version of the book also, and you can download the coffee table book using the QR code displayed. We'll also drop in the links in the chat box. So, some very powerful images captured by our youth champions of how climate change is impacting young children. And we have categorized them according to the nurturing care components of how it is affecting their health, nutrition, responsive caregiving, safety, and protection. Some very powerful and moving images. I'm sure you will enjoy. Do download the coffee table book, and if you are interested in a hard copy, you can write to our communication officer, Neha. We'll be sharing her email ID as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Evelyn, for this. Now I'll hand it over to Hari for introducing our keynote speakers and our youth champions. Over to you, Hari.
Thank you, Neelima, and thank you, Evelyn, for the wonderful launch and for the very kind words. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Bodh Mathura, who is the chairperson for the Commonwealth Asia Youth Alliance. Now, Bodh is a close friend, and he has also served as the head of research, engagement, and climate action at the National Youth Services Council in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's apex youth engagement, youth development agency. And he is also a UNICEF youth advocate, where he worked towards strengthening social policy, protecting vulnerable groups. His keynote is addressing meaningful youth engagement in climate policy and country negotiations, along with case studies from South Asia. Over to you both.
Thank you, Hari. And also, thank you, ARNEC, for inviting me today. I think that was a great coffee table book that was shared with some stark images. And yeah, let me just begin my address by saying that climate change is a failure of intergenerational justice. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. In Asia Pacific, there's and that failure is clearly visible. Our region is among one of the most climate vulnerable, and while it has only contributed minimally for this impact, it is young people who carry the burden, the heaviest burden of climate change. And that is clear from the images that we just saw in the coffee table book, as well as what you see in the presentation just a few months ago from Sri Lanka with the cyclone Detwa. Extreme weather, infectious diseases, undernutrition, displacement, and deepening economic insecurity puts their life and their future at risk. Yet, the very policy instruments that determine these trajectories, the national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, have too often been developed without meaningfully including young people and children. NDCs are not symbolic national statements. They set the national mitigation plans, define adaptation priorities, as well as outline financing strategies and assign institutional responsibility, both for development partners, but also for civil society as well as young people, if they are included. In essence, they chart our development pathways for the next decade. When young people are excluded from shaping these policies, there cannot be intergenerational equity. So I think taking this into consideration, we did a research on how young people were included in the NDC revision process, especially in South Asia. And I will share a few case studies from 4 South Asian countries to show how young people themselves led, as well as other development organizations and networks like ARNEC joined in to become strong allies for these young people to make sure they were included within the revision process. The next slide. Starting off. So Bangladesh, for the NDC, the second NDCs, which came out in 2021, there was zero mention of young people and no young people ever included at any stage of the consultations. So this like lack of inclusion uh, allowed young people created a pathway for young people to mobilize, creating the Youth for NDC movement within Bangladesh. They not only acted as just youth, but also took a step forward to ensure that other marginalized communities, which policy documents or policy consultations don't touch, are also consulted. So young people went out to rural regions and made sure that their youth statement was not just one that included young voices, but also other marginalized voices like youth and children. They also made sure just not their voice, but other marginalized voices were also heard. So this was done by one through a recommendation set of recommendations, but also by doing a youth-led analysis of the previous set of NDCs and giving through the NDC Youth Review. They made sure that there were technical and sectoral recommendations given, and there were the gaps of the previous NDCs were also highlighted. Secondly, they got these set of recommendations further approved by a set of a national level petition which got over 20,000. So not did they just come up with uh, a set of recommendations, they made sure that those recommendations were backed by the people, and especially young people in Bangladesh. This momentum allowed them to be included within the consultation process, with one young person who led the NDC, a Youth for NDC movement, also being part of the main national steering committee for the NDC revision process. So they got in the NDC 3.0, which was released late last year, over 64 times young people were mentioned, and 19 of the recommendations word to word that they gave in their set of recommendations were directly included in the national document. So I think going from zero to the exact recommendations that they wanted, 19 of them to be included, was quite a win. And then that was not just built off uh, goodwill or luck. It was the clear momentum that they built through doing technical, credible reviews, as well as getting it backed by mobilizing people towards it. Next slide, please. In yeah. In Sri Lanka, this took a bit of a different approach. In Sri Lanka, the government themselves stated that they will include a Jesse cross-cutting section. So gender equity and social inclusion was already mandated from the government in the start, which allowed UNDP and UNICEF, which were partners who were assisting in this specific area, to consult young people and through a youth-led process create the youth mechanism that the NDC revision process would include. So young people were brought in, and young people themselves were allowed to design the way that the youth engagement would happen. So they formed the NDC Youth Sounding Board, which kind of ideated on how each process would take place. So they came up with the idea, okay, we need a national level consultation that includes young people from all districts and all regions and all backgrounds of Sri Lanka. So the recommendations that go as the youth recommendations are not just from like the capital city or like specific, affluent youth groups, but included a very representative set of recommendations, taking into consideration lived experiences from across Sri Lanka. Secondly, they identified that NDs getting these rural young people or more marginalized young people involved in a technical policy level document is quite difficult. So they created a trilingual NDC learning hub where they took the previous NDC and made it more youth and child friendly. And also a bit more gamified, so they could view it through the phone and get to know what the policies were and why it mattered to their lives as well. So, and it was made trilingual, so accessible in all three languages that are spoken in Sri Lanka. Uh, so, and this effort was followed by making sure that one or two young people were also included in each of the technical working sectoral groups of the NDC revision process. So not only did they ideally consult a representative group of young people, they made the information accessible to those young people who were going to give recommendations, but also they made sure that those recommendations were not just given as a piece of paper, but they were there on the in the consultations next to the senior officials and the subject experts to push forward these recommendations. And I think even in Sri Lanka, so from NDC2, which had around two or three mentions of young people, youth, the word youth, went to close to 52 youth mentions, and as well as them being given specific roles under specific smaller sectoral NDCs. This was also another clear win, but then this was also, I think, the most important things compared to Bangladesh is that establishing a NDC youth sounding board with the backing of the government is a step forward towards institutionalizing this process of youth engagement. Next slide. In the case of Maldives, there was, I think, we discussed two great case studies where we saw such great wins, but Maldives, I think, while the government did show, the Ministry of Climate Change did show strong will to include youth, there was not a very strong formation of either young people or other bodies to include youth. So young people were included in a consultation as part of a wider civil society consultation and as a subgroup of that consultation rather. So there was no institutional or structured formation, rather just a consultation method that is mostly followed, I think, across other countries. This uh, kind of made their inputs less considered more emotional or activist, like called youth activists, rather than youth as a technical input. But however, I think the young people at the consultation were able to persevere and make sure that the Maldivian NDC 3.0 included mental health and climate anxiety and gave focus to that, actually widening what uh, people think of as climate adaptation. When we think of climate adaptation, we normally in policy documents, they normally consider more infrastructure-based adaptation. Whereas I think the young people were able to clearly push for climate anxiety and displacement cause mental health effects to be also included within this definition. While this was not a great method, I guess, of including young people, the document itself did, however, take into consideration what these young people mentioned, but also other research backed. I think that comes from my personal understanding is that comes from the team of the climate change directorate within Maldives being built of majority young people. I think that also is one way of including youth, but I think a more structural, institutional way is the way forward. Next slide, please. In the case of Pakistan, their effort was mainly led by UNICEF. UNICEF was able to convene young people from different regions of Pakistan and also partner with their National Youth Council and other organizations working on climate change and youth to guided by the UNICEF's toolkit on NDC engagement to create the NDC Youth and Gender Technical Working Group. This group together held consultations which reached over 26,000 young people across 16 cities of Pakistan to really bring the voices of youth from across the region in a very consultative process and be included within the document. Once again, this shows that the government, I think the partnership that the ministry and UNICEF had allowed for youth to be included. But this process was mostly led by UNICEF itself rather than young people. So there's always a step forward, which can be taken to make sure that youth themselves lead their engagement. And also Pakistan's NDC, thanks to this engagement, really focused on green skills, especially with the high levels of unemployment that youth face in Pakistan, as well as the youth bulge that exists. They really made sure that they gave enough space for the just transition that is needed to ensure uh, a more climate friendly country, but as well as give opportunity to young people to be part of that. So this as well, I think these 4 case studies from South Asia show different levels and different strategies of youth engagement and how all of them can lead to a positive attribute. But I think there's a lot to learn from each one and how we can make it more structured and institutional as being the best case scenario for meaningful youth engagement. Next slide. Since we gather here, ARNEC has gathered a set of a group of youth as well as youth workers or social workers, people working towards the cause of expanding early childhood care and development. I wanted to go into how and what is the best way forward for youth inclusion according to the case studies and the learnings of the case studies. I think one of the most important things is to make sure that we consider youth engagement within the climate policy or in any policy as a form of intergenerational justice, as them be acknowledging them as being rights holders, not beneficiaries of these policies, that we acknowledge that they themselves have a right to create these policies and be part of that policy creation. So it goes from beyond the norm of just consultations, but them to be one of those writers, like we saw in Bangladesh, when they included 19 of the policies that were written by young people through a consultative process that they themselves read. That shows that they are writers of policies. And I think if a government is willing, it has the political will, it's clear that they can do that. I think, and the second part is to create like representative legitimacy, which makes sure that sometimes organizations, even the ones that I work with, it is easier and cheaper to bring in young people in person from where you are based. So it will always mostly be a capital, like young people from the capital of that country. Whereas it's much more difficult to go out there and hear the voices of others. But if we say this is youth recommendations or country level youth recommendations, we have to go that extra mile, that put that extra effort to make sure that we get the voices of all youths coming from all backgrounds. Otherwise, it becomes the youth statement from the capital city of Colombo rather than from Sri Lanka. And making sure that we have an institutional structure, but also funding available to make sure that kind of legitimacy can be approved is important in youth inclusion. Thirdly, building on policy literacy. Young people sometimes, it is fair that some senior officials say that the statements of young people are emotional, but they are emotional and they can also be both emotional and technically sound. So it's our duty as organizations and people working in this space to make sure that the lived experience of these young people are also technically sound so that they can't be just pushed away by the policymakers, but rather they have technical inputs that can be included within the documents and the programs that follow. This, of course, like making sure that that data is available, that information is available to young people in the language that they are most comfortable with, also in language that they're most comfortable with. Especially when you're working with children, you once again make that extra effort to make sure that it can be consumed by the children and they can understand it in the way that they are used to understanding it. So I think that takes a lot of time and effort that policymakers sometimes don't have. So that's where the work that we do, you all do is really important. Third, I think always forming youth sounding boards or technical working groups in like giving it a structure is quite important in giving having youth inclusion. One thing that I, as well as a lot of young people nowadays, advocate for is youth-led youth engagement mechanisms, asking young people themselves how they want to be included. So it really is a bottom-up approach rather than a top-bottom, even in youth engagement itself. In most cases, prior, it would be that I think the organization would, their programming team would decide how youth engagement happens and then include young people, even if it's in a meaningful way. But I think we can go even one step further now that we have come so far to make sure that even in the designing of that youth engagement structure, we can include young people and their inputs. Next slide. I think as a on as a final note, can we go back to the yeah. As a final note, I think it's important to identify when you're engaging with the policy as well as government, identify the entry points as well as the allies that you have within ministries or departments. Uh, Making sure that you're not too late. So in Bangladesh, they put the youth review, NDC youth review in the start of the year before the government has already had even started the NDC revision process. So when they were starting it, they in the government's first meeting, they already had this document with them, sent to them. So they already knew, okay, from the first meeting itself that there is going to be this movement of young people and they're going to somehow push their way through to the policy. So it's really important to know when the review cycles are, which ministries are leading it. In, for example, in Sri Lanka, uh, even though the environment ministry leads, the sectors are led by different ministries. So the environment ministry doesn't really have control over what the energy sector NDCs look like or how their engagement will look like. It will be the energy ministry. So it's really important to know which focal point to that you need to be advocating towards and connecting way before the process starts to make sure you build that trust and bond. Secondly, within policy engagement itself, it's important even in the NDC revision process the next time at least to make sure that there is already youth advisory bodies or constituencies set place in that revision process. This time in Sri Lanka, there was a like Jesse sector, but there needs to be within that Jesse sector a youth constituency, not just an external constituency, but one that is set by allowed by the government itself. I think in Maldives, we saw it was just a consultation, but then the ministry themselves could have an advisory board, which is not just to give advice during the NDC or policy revision process, but throughout the year, they can reach out to, and that has a two-way communication stream where young people can also share their inputs as they learn about new things or they experience newer difficulties with the impacts of climate change, so that throughout the year, not just during the policy creation process, but also during the implementation process, there's a set institutional way that young people can communicate as well as the ministry can gain the inputs of youth, and that so they can be recognized in that way. Thirdly, another really important thing is that ministerial staff or even technical subject experts do not have a background in youth work. So you can't just expect them to take in what young people are saying. So there needs to be clear training given to them how in order that they can meaningfully engage youth. Because that even when it comes to children, it gets once again goes a step further that they need to be trained. They're not trained in youth engagement. So they need to be trained, at least given a bit of training and shown the importance and the value of youth inclusion so that they, in those consultations, know how to engage with young people and take in their inputs, as well as taking the inputs in the language that young people give and be able to translate that into policy language. So that is also there's a clear gap. I think even though in all the successful countries, uh, I myself from Sri Lanka, when I was at the technical working groups, they did not really understand what we were saying, and it took quite a lot of time for them to get used to the level of ambition that young people have, but also to realize that, okay, we are not just giving recommendations, we are giving these recommendations because we want to also be a part of implementing it. And the ministry themselves don't have to do it, we will be there with them. So I think that element needs to be like, they need to be made more aware of it. And finally, when it comes to monitoring, execution, and implementation of NDC 3.0, since we are talking about climate change, there's been really a lot of success seen across the board in around the world of youth engagement compared to NDC 2. But in implementation, it falls short because most of the time it is led by either UN agencies or the government, and they, when things are happening, they don't really take into account youth. So it is important that you be and also youth or children included NDCs sometimes take a backseat, whereas more mitigation, putting up solar or wind take a more front seat. So there's always those NDCs that fall through the holes are ones that are like green skills training for youth or like those awareness. So there's always space for young people and youth organizations as well as organizations working for youth development to pick up those NDCs that the government probably will not even in the 5 years, and take it up and be like, okay, we want to work and help you implement that NDCs. So it's not just always us asking something from the government, but also going as young people and youth organizations, we go and we say, okay, we will take up that NDC and we will help you uh, achieve that goal. Yeah, I think I really want to acknowledge that compared to the previous NDCs, this NDC revision process has been quite a success for youth engagement, but clearly there needs to be more institutional arrangements made to make sure that that success or the win of that youth advocacy has brought is maintained throughout the implementation process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, both. For first showcasing several successful youth engagement and co-creation initiatives in our own backyard in South Asia and in the region of Asia Pacific, especially things like youth sounding boards and using gamified methodology, as we often do in the ECD sector for young children, to ensure that the last mile, the last mile youth reach, and like you said, to have representative legitimacy. And I want to thank you not only for showcasing, what was successful, but was also what was also not successful, as much as, like you said, some were just mere consultations and it was more tokenistic processes, but then young people kind of pushed it through. I think there's definitely a lot of food for thought, and I definitely have a lot of questions. But coming to, at the end, the pathways that, for deepening policy engagement, I really, I think I resonated with the, I think it's so different for each country, where, where you said, although NDC is, governed by the energy sector, it's also, like several sectoral things are governed by their own ministries. And I think for ECDS in particular, I think our champions would then be, I think, at least in the case of Sri Lanka, it would be the Ministry of Women and Children, and maybe the Ministry of Health if you want that access of child health or early childhood health, Ministry of Development. And that entry point that you said at the end, I think, that was, I think, the biggest highlight, where you said, if the government, I know in the during climate negotiations, you see that it's always their biggest agenda that they want to push it through. And early childhood, I mean, I'm using early childhood because we have the early childhood space, but early childhood, things like youth are more, it takes a backseat because they want to have less barriers in, let's say, accessing funding or accessing, or envision, they're finalizing that commitment of the NDCs and showing that they've implemented it. And I think the ECD sector from the Asia Pacific can take away is, I think, a bit that we approach the governments and we tell them that, it's fine that if you can't do it, we will help you do it. And I think that's a very good entry point, at least, in Sri Lanka from your experience. And I think that gives, I think, me and Neelima and Evelyn, I think, a lot of strength to know, okay, this is what they're also looking for and this has worked. And I think also looking at all of our other partners in ARNEC, from Bhutan, from Indonesia, I think it gives us such power there. And thank you so much. Right now, I want to ask, I have a lot of questions that probably that can wait. And we'll give the floor for some questions and then for you. And please feel free to type the questions out, everyone, or, raise your hand and we will try unmuting you.
While we wait for some questions, I'll just share that when you mentioned the Ministry of Women's and Child Affairs in Sri Lanka, I just remember that they were either that ministry or the youth ministry were not included as ministries for the NDC consultations. So they were never part of the NDC 2.0, and then it was one of the recommendations of Sri Lanka's youth for NDC 3.0 was to include them. So they were invited. So they will be, while they don't have their sector alone, they will be part of the implementation process and given specific roles to play. So I think that, was also a clear win and something we are all proud of.
Oh, amazing. I think we definitely have, and it's so much that the ECT community can then resonate with the youth community as well, like you said. And it's about co-benefits, like we say in the health side. It's climate change and health has so many co-benefits. I also think networks like the ECD network and the youth network have co-benefits that we could then learn. And ECD kind of also falls within the bracket of child and youth in that constituency. So it would be, that I think there's so much synergy there to take forward. But I'm just looking for any questions. I know people might be a bit shy or, but I think we can wait for a minute for the questions. If not, I'll ask you my question. I have a lot.
In case you have any questions, do put them in the chat box or use the Q&A feature. And Hari, I think we'll wait for the participants to share any questions. In the meantime, we can move to the next section. If you have a question, please ask, and then we can move to the next section. Thank you so much.
Okay. Here, could you share the next slides, please? Now, once again, thank you so much both for that brilliant pick on the NDCs and its intersection for what we have with the climate change and then its intersection with ECD. Now, this is another co-created output of our inaugural Climate ECD Youth Network, produced by our youth champions in this 7-minute powerful short film showcasing powerful storytelling about the real life impacts of climate change. We will have a small screening just to see how climate change, its impacts affects early childhood and how young people are seeing it through their eyes.
Every moment of childhood, whether it is a smile, a first step, or a curious gaze, brings the promise of a better future. And at ARNEC, we believe that even in this changing world, this promise can be protected. Whenever we talk about climate change, we often forget the most vulnerable group, young children.
Young people have been integral to the climate movement for over a century. Here at ARNEC, with the generous support of the Bainum Foundation, we were able to bring together 7 young advocates from across 7 countries in the Asia Pacific to see and document on how climate change is seen through the eyes of young children.
Tapi mon asal pemante lekro, asal kedau kelam te lau kedau tak sa akas tik kedau kelam tu kemanung bu kia kami kru pun tak. Tôi bảo thay nó thay anh cốt dân nâng phá tất nông ca pra pra ở thua sai chả cá và con mua robot xinh xinh. Tôi bảo khai chính ý cứ con trai cho nó nói ai nâng khá mà hộp là bảo hộp trong tháng ngày.
ஹாஸ்டலுக்கு போனாக்கா வேலைக்கு போக முடியாது வீடு வீடுமாடா அன்னதான் இருக்கும் எப்போ பார்த்தாலும்.
Children cannot regulate their body temperature as effectively as adults, so they do face the severity. They are at a higher risk of heat strokes. The mental growth of a child, apart from that long exposure to dehydration that is caused due to heat stroke, it usually leads to impaired function of kidneys and also leads to stunted growth.
Yang kerasa itu kan dari iklim. Tahun ke tahun jalanan diuruk lagi, tinggiin lagi, banjir, diuruk lagi, perbaikan lagi. Rumah saya jadi tinggal setengahnya. Itu akan berdampak kepada anak-anak sekarang, mereka yang menanggung karena cuacanya tidak menentu.
Undulat talaga ako nakapag-ahon sa amin na dito ng bulan. Napakalakas binabalitan namin. Marami kami nung binabalitan namin yung mga pata sa plastic. Yun. Dito na ako tumira para ma-instant naman ako patuloy yung pag-aaral niya. Paano mababago ako? Kahit siya pinasasabi ng kaluwa ng mga
the global climate risk index that Bangladesh is in 7th position. Drowning problems during this flood. Heat stroke is also a very disaster thing which is happening due to climate change. So lots of problems actually children are facing, and if we adults are not ready to save and secure our children, so who will save them?
제주도 리슨디 같이 되면서 진나 저러가 아니 때나스랑가 아날르디비 이시스티나 쯔이발라 이시스티나 쯔 드레다가 뭐 코게어 주시고 아니베 야르프라드 아노리 텐다 아니스미 드레 서를 치료 안스미베 주니디기 단남식이 주어스미데 안스미 치료보네
अझै पनि सल्युसन छैन भनेर निराशाजनक कुरा गर्यौँ भनेदेखि त वी विल नट गेट एनिवेयर चाइल्डहुड चाहिँ ग्रोइङ अप एकदम रमाइलो सजिलोसँग बित्यो हामी खोला नाला माटो हिलो सेल्दा केही गर्यो वी वर सेयर त्यसमा पल्युसन छैन केमिकल्स छैन अनि हामी आनन्दले खेल्न सक्थ्यौँ अनि मेरै आफ्नो छोरालाई फिल भएकोले गर्दाखेरि उसलाई 3-4 महिनाको हुँदाखेरि नै एकदमै ठुलो रेस्पिरेटरी प्रब्लम भएको थियो होइन अनि त्यो गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो एयर पल्युसनसँग सम्बन्धित भएर त्यो सायद भयो होला
At ARNEC, we advocate for the rights of children and for their well-being. And along with our partners, we work towards influencing policy, strengthening systems, and building capacities to ensure that every child grows up in a safe and nurturing environment. We need to invest in services for young children and families, especially in the areas that are impacted by climate change. This means making preschools, health centers, and caregiver support more climate resilient. It is important to listen to communities, caregivers, teachers, and young people. They often have powerful, impactful, and practical solutions. Let's amplify their voices and support their initiatives. Let these stories be more than evidence. Let them be a call to act urgently, to plan differently, and to put children at the heart of a just, sustainable, and resilient planet.
Thank you. The images you just saw are not just symbolic. They're evidence, they're lived realities, they're policy signals that say that this is not only an environmental crisis, it is a child development crisis, it is a public health crisis, and fundamentally, it is an issue of intergenerational justice. Now, we have some questions. Now, for the interest of time, I will go through the ones that first came. And so we have one question to board. Why would you consider youth especially valuable in promoting the interests of very young children in regards to climate change? What would be their special message?
So I think for that, young people, through their lived experience, they're the closest. So it was just maybe a few years, 5-6 years ago, that they themselves were children. So they are the closest to the lived experiences of today. I think the older generations, the world that they grew up in, and the world that young people today grow up in, especially children today grow up in, as UNICEF puts it, it's a climate change child. So the world has changed because of climate change, and their experiences, be it in school with the high heat waves or just day-to-day activities, it has changed so much. So I think the ones that really know how they felt and their experience of that are young people, because just a few years ago, they themselves were young children. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that and give them that space to voice out. And young people then young people can be the biggest champions and advocates for these children who themselves might not have that voice. I normally don't like to give a special message. I guess the only message I will give is to ask more young people within your communities, within the spaces that you work in, for what their special message is. So I guess that will be mine.
Thank you, both. Now, moving on, for the interest of time. Now, with these two amazing outputs from a year's worth of work, I want to introduce you to the people behind them. The 7 young champions that made it all possible with their passion, their drive, working for young children in this poly crisis. I want to introduce to you Sagar from Nepal, Nika from the Philippines, Dawat from Cambodia, Katyani from India, Erwin from Indonesia, Mehdi from Bangladesh, and Namge from Bhutan. Next slide, please. Now, to give you a bit about the process of our next youth engagement, and as both said, how we co-created with youth, I think Evelyn and the board of ARNEC was very clear from the outset that this had to be a youth-led, a youth project in itself, and the adults were not going to have a say as much as youth. They were going to support. In June, we first started with a youth consultation at the ARNEC conference in Penang, Malaysia. We had young negotiators, we had doctors, we had DRR workers, we had students, we had ECD practitioners as well joining us. And from there, we had the first consultation, which then progressed on to an online form of consultation and co-creation of the Youth Challenge from August to September, which then culminated into ARNEC getting its first youth champion that you just saw earlier. Now, once they were selected, they were then trained on first participatory methodology and qualitative research. And the participatory methodology that we focused on was photo voice. And then from February, we started then getting this very strong, very powerful emancipatory methodology contributions, collecting from all regions in an open call. Next slide, please. Following which, the youth champions then underwent training again for interviewing skills, for filmmaking, for storytelling, and communication. And they went on ahead from May to June to then conduct their interviews in their communities, and then, which then came as the first output that you saw as the advocacy short film. And at the end, we then had, from October, we then collated all the photo voice submissions into the coffee table book. And it was very nice that in November 14th, we launched our short film at COP30, followed by our launch currently of the coffee table book. Next slide, please. Now, the co-creation project, as you see, these are some photos that are very nice of the conference in Malaysia. We have our young people from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from India, all of them in their process of co-creation. We used a lot of gamified theory, as both said. We used participatory methodologies, and this was our first successful consultation. Next slide, please. Here you can see the launch of the video at COP30. It was live streamed. We can send you a link if you want, and I believe it was in our next newsletters as well. We also had Bodh joining us there. He was Sri Lanka's negotiator on loss and damage. And we had a young doctor, a young youth advocate of UNICEF from Canada, and again, another youth negotiator from South Asia. Next slide, please. Now, we have a couple of planned dissemination that we're planning to do. Of course, as I mentioned, we have launched the youth short advocacy film, and along with the coffee table book. And now we believe we have a couple more screenings that we would Oh, I'm so sorry about that. It's a bad internet connection. No, as I was saying, we have a couple of things planned for dissemination, which we would love to engage with you now. As I said, we started with the launch at COP, and now we are hoping for a couple of screenings at first the London Climate Week or the Bangkok Climate Week in 2026. We're also thinking of screenings at the SB meetings for UNFCCC. And also we would love to engage with you and our community for university screenings or community screenings, along with having photo voice exhibitions in places at communities, in centers, wherever possible. Next slide, please. Now, to give voice to our first cohort of young champions, I would first invite Erwin Mahendra Eka Saputra, who is a climate and DRR resilience worker and ARNEC youth champion from Indonesia, to engage, to talk about his engagement as a youth champion and his reflections. I think there is some technical difficulty for Erwin, so maybe we can move on to our second youth champion, and we'll hope for Erwin to join. Second youth champion, Namge, who is an ECCD practitioner and ARNEC youth champion from Bhutan. Namge brings frontline early childhood experience and a powerful lens on climate and caregiving systems. Namge, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Namge.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Respected organizers, mentors, fellow youth champions, and friends from across the region. I've been working as ECD facilitator for past 6 years and more, and it is truly an honor to be part of this closing webinar and to stand here as a youth champion representing ARNEC and my country, Bhutan. I'm grateful for this platform that has brought together young voices committed to climate action, child well-being, and regional collaboration. Thank you for creating a space where our stories, experiences, and perspective truly matters. Being part of this initiative has been deeply enriching journey for me. Through intensive training in photo voice, interviewing, videography, ethnographic documentation, I gained practical skills that allowed me to document a real climatic issue from my community and understand how it directly affects the life, well-being, and development of young children. So beyond these skills, what stayed with me most were the meaningful conversation and shared learning, engaging with youth advocates from different countries. It broadened my understanding of climate change from both regional and global perspectives, and reminded me that while our contexts may differ, our concerns for children and the future are deeply connected. Representing Bhutan on this platform was not only an honor, but also a responsibility. It gave me the opportunity to amplify the voices of young children who are among the most vulnerable to climate impact, yet are often unheard and are overlooked. This journey helped me realize that people are not just future leaders. Young peoples are not just future leaders. We are leaders now. Our voices matters, and our actions can create real change. As we close this chapter, I carry forward a renewed commitment to continue this advocacy, raise awareness, and work collaboratively to build climate resilience community for our youngest generation. So can you go to next slide, please? So this is the image. This is the picture I have taken personally myself in 2021 when I attended the Royal Highland Festival in Bhutan. So as you can see, in the picture, it is the Himalayas of Bhutan. So Bhutan remains carbon negative and guided by gross national happiness, showing that development and environmental protection can go hand in hand. So through this, through ECCD, we are planting values of compassion, sustainability, and responsibility towards nature in our youngest citizen. So Bhutan may be small, but our commitment to protecting the Himalayas is a global responsibility, because what happens here affects the world. The melting glaciers are clear signs of climate change threatening water sources, agriculture, hydropower that sustains our community. So glacial lake outbursts, you can say, glove put lives, livelihood, and children's future at risk, especially in remote mountain area. Now I'll tell why this matters for East City. Climate change directly affects young children's health, nutrition, safety, and learning environment. We know that our young children, they are most vulnerable citizen. So children are, yet they are also powerful agent of change when they nurtured early. Each city plays a critical role in building climate awareness, care for nature, and resilience from the early years. So this is about the melting glaciers. Melting glacier. Can you go to next slide, please? So this is picture from the east in Bhutan, east region in Bhutan, the landslide that happened in 2023. So it claimed 23 precious life and is a painful reminder that climate change is no longer distant. It is here. It is real and is devastating. It stands as a heartbreaking reminder of growing impact of climate change on our fragile mountain environment. Unpredictable rainfall has increased the frequency and severity of landslide, turning natural landscapes into sites of sudden tragedy. Such disaster deeply affect children who uh, lose not only safety and loved ones, but also stability and access to early care and learning. This highlights the urgent need for ECCD systems to include disaster preparedness, safe infrastructure, and psychological support to help young children cope and recover. I'm sorry to share this, but Bhutan contributes very little to global greenhouse gas emission. It bears a heavy burden of climate related disaster, reinforcing the need for global climate responsibility, while Bhutan continues to uphold its value of gross national happiness, compassion, and care for future generations. So thank you so much. This is all. And I have, this is the climatic issue that I have chosen to talk about from Bhutan's perspective. And this is all I have to talk for today. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Namke, for those powerful words and powerful reflections. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Katyani Goswami, who's a medical practitioner and a ARNEC youth champion from India, working. Katyani is a medical doctor working with young children at the forefront, championing climate impacts on health in South Indian policy and capacity building. Over to you, Katyani.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have been given this platform to bring to you something that is very close to my heart. Can we please go to the next slide? So, as saddening as these pictures are, this is a lived reality for many of these little children. In India, climate change is no longer a future risk, it is a lived public health reality. According to the India Meteorological Department, the country has seen a steady rise in average temperature over the last 2 decades, with heat waves becoming longer, more frequent, and more intense. The years 2023 and 2024 were among the hottest on record, with large parts of India experiencing temperatures exceeding historical norms. So, this trend is not episodic, it is structural. Extreme heat is now one of the most underestimated health threats in India. National data shows tens of thousands of heat related illness cases reported each year, with underreporting widely acknowledged. UNICEF estimates that over 76% of children in South Asia are exposed to extreme heat, and India accounts for a substantial proportion because of its population size, urban density, and socioeconomic disparities. Children in India are increasingly exposed to heat, not just during peak summers, but for extended months of the year. There's also a study that was done that shows that by the year 2050, 3 million children in Southeast Asia will be affected. Now, coming from a clinical standpoint, as a doctor, children are uniquely vulnerable. They are not just young adults or smaller adults. they have very different physiologies. Their thermoregulation is immature, which means that they cannot tolerate heat the way you and I do. They dehydrate faster, and they are dependent on adults and systems for protection. In India, this vulnerability is compounded by realities such as overcrowded housing, poor ventilation, limited green spaces, inadequate access to clean water, and schools that are not heat resilient. Heat exposure in children is associated not only with heat exhaustion and heat stroke, but also with worsening nutrition, increased respiratory illnesses, reduced school attendance, impaired cognitive performance, which is basically your neurological performance, and long term health consequences. And to note here, it is not just these babies or little children that are affected, but also pregnant women. So the baby that is prenatal, even before it is born, is being affected by this climate change. This becomes especially visible in cities like Chennai, where I did this photo voice project. For most of you who will not be aware, Chennai is a coastal city and it routinely records very high heat indices due to the combination of temperature and humidity, making heat stress physiologically dangerous, even at temperatures that may appear moderate on paper. Government data showed that Tamil Nadu, the state in which Chennai is, has seen a marked increase in heat wave days in recent years, with projections indicating further escalation. Now, through this photo voice project, I documented children living and studying in environments that trap heat. This is tin roofs, poorly ventilated rooms, overcrowded homes, and streets with little shade. This reveals something data alone often misses, which is climate risk in India is deeply unequal. Children from low income urban communities are exposed earlier for longer durations and with fewer protective buffers. So, climate change does not affect all children equally. It follows lines of poverty, infrastructure, and social exclusion. One of the most important insights from this project was recognizing children's complete lack of agency. They cannot choose where they live, whether their homes are climate resilient, or whether their schools are equipped to handle extreme heat. Yet, they bear a disproportionate share of climate related harm. In the Indian context, this makes climate change not just an environmental issue, but a child rights and equity issue. Next slide, please. As a doctor, this project also forced a very difficult realization about the limits of medicine. Vaccines and medicines can treat diseases, developmental damage caused by repeated heat exposure. No treatment can undo lost learning days, chronic dehydration, heat related nutritional decline, or the long term impact of environmental stress on a developing child. In India, where access to healthcare itself is unequal, prevention becomes even more critical. The photo voice method helped bridge this gap between evidence and experience. It transformed climate data into lived realities, allowing children's environments to speak alongside epidemiology. It reinforced that protecting child health in India requires preventive, multi-sectoral action, heat-resilient urban planning, climate-safe schools, early warning systems tailored to child safety, and health systems that recognize climate as a core determinant of health. Completing this project reshaped my understanding of my role as a clinician. It made clear that in India, child health cannot be safeguarded within hospital walls alone. Climate change is already shaping the health trajectories of millions of Indian, and not just Indian, but children across the globe. And if we continue to respond only after illness occurs, we will always be late. Next slide, please. In conclusion, climate change in India is already narrowing children's futures physically, cognitively, and socially. So, those who have contributed the least to this crisis are bearing its greatest burden. That is all I have to say. Thank you so much for the platform. It was an honor working alongside youth advocates of all these different countries who brought such fresh yet detrimental detrimental realities and their own perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Katyani, for your your brilliant reflection, especially as a doctor, as a medical professional from India, where a country where it's so much affected by climate change in our backyard as well, in the South Asian, Southeast Asian, and the Asia Pacific context. Now, moving on, we would like to invite again Erwin Mahendra Ekasaputra, who has led school-based earthquake preparedness programs and represented youth voices at the ASEAN Dialogue and COP28. Erwin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hari. So sorry previously, suddenly electricity shut down here. So I would like to share my experience how to using the photo voice and also project here, and what does young people like me as a brother and sister of young children, and also represent the voices of parents and also the caregiver in facing of climate change. So sometimes the story is not only about graphs or policy brief, but rising flood waters outside their school, amazing parents at the dinner, and also a playground turned into a swamp. So next slide, please. So basically, this photo collected in three most climate risk area in Indonesia, in East Nusa Tenggara, Riau Island, and also in coastal area in North Jakarta. So I will not explain of its photos, but I want to explain one of my favorite photo that taken by my peer. So this is children standing alone by the shore, gazing out the sea, waiting for their parents return from the fishing. So due to the climate change impact, fish are now harder to find and close to shore. Fishermen, including these child parents, might sail farther and stay at the sea longer for their sustained livelihood. So as the result, the children are left behind for extended period without consistent emotional support or care from their mother and also her fathers. The situation reflects the climate change is not only environmental issue but also a critical disruption in responsive caregiving. So this is the photo voice can reflect how the story is more powerful rather than the data, and also we can represent the voice of children, young children, mother, and also caregiver. So to explore more it's the story, please download the profitable book document. Next slide, please, Hari. So not only for young children, but also climate change impacted the ECD educator and also ECD center. So this is the situation in coastal area in North Jakarta, the most of climate risk areas in Indonesia. At that time, before interview, the ECD educator called me at 3 a.m. But Erwin, this interview session should be cancelled because due to of coastal flood in ECD center. But we still continue because of I see the resilience of the ECD educator to ensure that the education of young children is still continue even though in time of crisis. So the ECD educator is conducting a home visit and then borrow the book and then coordinate with the parents to ensure that their parents is accompany the young children to read the book and also to read the tasks that from the ECD educator. So this is the picture how the coastal flood is impacting ECD center in North Jakarta area. Next slide, please. So not only impacting the ECD center, this is the picture of the Miss Holila. Miss Holila is one of the ECD educator there. This is her homes. that impacted by coastal flood in North Jakarta. Not only for the climate change impact, there is also land subsidence issue. And then the house of Miss Holila is grounded below of the land because of the extraction of water in the community. So not only that, the educator explained about the slow development of young children learning because of the distraction. So in 1 year, there is 3 until 4 times ECD center closed due to the coastal flood in North Jakarta. But on the other hand, through this ethnographic interview and also photo voice, I can see the resilience of ECD community, how they ensure the continuity of education in time of crisis. Not only that, I also interview one of the parents and also caregiver. They cannot access the basic health services to get a vitamins because of the flood. So I think it's very important to ensure that the ECD community also aware in high level policy about this issue, because sometimes I find the challenge it's very difficult to find the evidence about ECD and climate change data. So I think this method is can be generate the evidence and more powerful evidence and bring it on the policy table. Next slide, please, Hari. So this is the message from the Miss Holila, because she told me if you will share the reply her message. So she hope the clean air, beach, and also nature, and all of the policymakers is must urgently strengthening ECD development ecosystem, because the future of young children is depend on the action that we take today. So next slide is my reflection about this project. So I think it's very crucial to ECD initiative also engage a youth, because that the previous key take note session, young people has several opportunity to bring their ideas in policy table. So I think it's very important to nurturing the next generation and also the brother and sister of young children to represent their voice with young people. So through this project, I also learn sometimes the experience of young children and also mothers rarely captured in policy brief and also data. But through this project, we can find it and also get deep dive about their experience in climate change, in face of climate change. So I think it's very replicable and also can be implemented not only for young people but also for ECD stakeholder to generate the evidence of climate change and early childhood development. So that's all from my presentation. Back to Hari. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erwin, once again for that powerful reflection, not only to you, but also to Katyayani and Namge. I think it definitely has given us a lot of food for thought. And for the interest of time, I don't think we'll be able to do question and answers after these powerful reflections, but please reach out to ARNEC and we would be very happy to connect and find solutions together. Now, as we conclude, I would like to leave us with these 3 reflections. Climate change must be framed as an intergenerational justice issue. Youth are not just beneficiaries, but we are also right holders and governance actors, and the same could be said for the children in their youngest years. And early childhood development must be structurally integrated into climate policy frameworks. So for going forward, ARNEC, we are pleased to launch the next cohort of ECD Climate Youth Knowledge Fellowship for young researchers, for young advocates around Asia Pacific. And we would also like to do a lot, like we showed the planned dissemination. We would love to have more screenings in universities and maybe in the Asia Pacific Climate Action Week or the Bangkok Climate Action Week. And also for the coffee table book, please get back to us and stay tuned. We'll be launching it, I think, in print officially. Thank you. And I would like to thank our speakers, our director, Evelyn, and Nilima, and everybody else once again.